Welcome to Joanna the Medium Show, broadcast on Ever Beyond Radio and through the Wolf Spirit Media Network, helping you transform from fear to freedom and reminding you of your true power. During this broadcast, we will discuss anything and everything connecting to owning your inner power and the essence of your spirit. We will hear inspiring stories from guests, as well as guidance from the spirit world. Jump on board for this incredible ride. Here's your host, Joanna.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who are new to the show, welcome, and I hope you find everything exciting. For those who are coming back, thank you so much for coming back. Tonight, another special guest, and it's one of the subjects that has been fascinating me since I was a preteen. Tonight we'll talk all about near-death experiences, or NDE for short. My guest tonight is a survivor of 3 such of those experiences, which I have heard of people experiencing 1, but 3, that's a whole different ballgame. He's also a former television news reporter and a mayor of a Canadian city, so he's also a politician, which I find fascinating because, typically speaking, these are left-brained individuals, so I can probably imagine how these experiences have rocked his world. Paul, like many people out there, was a skeptic at first, but of course, as you can imagine, his near-death experiences had not only rocked his world, but also turned his belief system upside down. And like I said, for someone who is probably a more left-brain individual, that would have been quite exciting, I would say, and probably some other words. What has happened through these experiences, because he has had this experience 3 times, he has been able to return through this door, so to speak, this doorway, time and time again, which is why he's also a trainer for the world-renowned Monroe Institute, which, by the way, I am attending this week, and I cannot wait. So I will be meeting Paul personally, and I'm looking forward to it. Most of the time, Paul spends his time writing, teaching, and speaking throughout the United States and Canada on the phenomenon of near-death and out-of-body experiences, which also include remote viewing, and that's another subject that fascinates me. Paul is also an author. His book, titled Eyes of an Angel, is a true story of a mainstream politician who could not openly share or discuss the profound spiritual experiences that profoundly changed his life and his perspective on life. You can find his book on Amazon, and I believe it's also Amazon.com. I will ask Paul when he comes on air. So the book is called Eyes of an Angel. And if you are interested in his book or the programs at Monroe Institute, you can contact him at www.paul-elder.com. And I will also post his information once I post this program on my YouTube channel, so you can click on it and talk to Paul that way. And without further ado, I would love to welcome Paul. Paul, hello.
Good evening, Joanna.
Good evening. Very nice to meet you. And I just got chills. I am so excited to talk to you because I get to meet you this week. And it's just a fascination of mine ever since I was preteen. So, thank you so much for joining us. This is very exciting. So 3 near-death experiences. I have heard of people having 1, 2, but 3, that's pushing the envelope. Isn't it?
Well, I can't seem to get it right, I guess.
I think you've been exposed to these situations in order to prepare you for a much grander picture, which is, I'm sure, what you are doing right now. So, help me understand, what does it feel like to have a near-death experience? Perhaps maybe go through your first experience, which was at age 12, fairly young. What happened?
Oh, excuse me. I'm just got back from Virginia, actually, and it seems that any time I go on an airplane, I get a little bit of a cold or something. So just a bit hacky. My apologies.
No worries.
Well, I can say, I mean, I've done a lot of things in my life, and politics being one of them, and and I was in the media and worked for CTV and a number of other places, and probably the most important part or aspect of my life, or what I consider to be important, are those near-death experiences and the subsequent body experiences, and how that sort of changed my world and changed my look at everything, including business, including politics. And I can tell you one thing, I think we need more spiritual politicians, but the most significant part of my life and the most appreciated are those near-death experiences. Notwithstanding the pain of a heart attack or being smashed up in a car accident, I think, for the most part, is the realization that we don't die, that death is really an illusion. It's a physical aspect. We ourselves and who we truly are never die.
Would you say, and this was purely my presumption, so I apologize if I made a mistake, but would you say prior to having this experience, were you most the physically oriented person, more the left brain individual?
Well, I think most of my life, I grew up in Saskatchewan in a large Catholic family. There's a redundancy. Large Catholic family. And, I had 10 brothers and sisters, so
wow,
13 of us in the house. And when you grow up that way in a poor farm family in the middle of nowhere, you kind of look at the world, if you can't eat it or hold it or share it, then it's, you don't want to believe it. So I wasn't given to any kinds of fantasies of the mind, if you will, along those lines. However, having said that, after I drowned when I was 12 years old and was under the water for 6 or 7 minutes and had an amazing experience. And but it's sort of, when you're 12 and weird stuff happens, you go, well, that was weird. And you go on with life. So I really didn't kind of, read anything into it until many, many years later, even though there were a whole bunch of changes in how I looked at life itself. And maybe to some degree I understood that we don't die. And so, being a young person, is dangerous enough. You're 10 feet tall and made of steel, right? It's sort of like, I seem to enjoy challenging the physical, whatever I could do, if it was to, go out on a limb further or whatever it is was physically, I had to try and be the best at it. And I think part of that is because I lack any fear of dying. And now, of course, in some ways I look forward to it.
Mm-hmm. I believe this is just what my heart intuition says, that those people who are afraid of death, they're afraid of the circumstances leading to death.
Well, I think so. I'm not looking forward to whatever, avenue that is, whether, I'm looking forward to the pain of it. But I think the most astonishing thing, and this I can say without question, at least in my mind, the most amazing thing that any of us will ever do, the most incredible experience will be our dying. We don't die. But just that transition and that knowing immediately that we don't die is such an incredible feeling. And, it's in those spaces in the mind or in the spirit or wherever it is that we understand that we are, eternal and that really nothing can hurt us. So when I was 12 years old, I wouldn't have believed this, but I can tell you one thing. Drowning is a very, very cool way to pass.
Cool or cruel?
Cool.
Cool. Wow. Really?
Well, I always see, I'll give you a quick little story here. This is, I'm 12 years old and our two cousins, from the big city of Edmonton, where they had swimming pools and things like that, were visiting our farm on the weekend out in Saskatchewan. And my little brother and I, we were warned many, many times, our parents, to stay away from the many ponds and dugouts, they call them back in the prairies, because we couldn't swim. Right? Mm-hmm. And so this one Saturday afternoon, we ended up out, running around chasing gophers or something like that. And we were about 1.5 miles from our farm home. And we discovered or came upon a pond where the neighbor's kids or somebody had left a raft. And so, of course, the next thing we know, we're bobbing up and down on this raft. And my older cousin, who was 14 or 15, thought when he, excuse me, when he discovered that, not only were my little brother and I, that we didn't know how to swim, but we're probably terrified of water, thought it would be a lot of fun to rock the raft. Well, if you wonder why you've had no bad luck in your life, it's because Murphy lives with me, right? So I fell in the water. And, it was the strangest thing because I never had the presence of mind to even dog paddle. It was just an instant sort of panic. I am, screwed. Pardon me. And I just sank. I never even tried to dog paddle, which is, now looking back is so, is so weird. And as I'm sinking into the water, and the pond was about 15 feet deep. And I sank, just slowly sank down until I could feel my feet touch the mud on the bottom of the pond. And I must have pushed or something or, because I floated back up. And as I approached the surface of the water, I could tell because it was a little warmer and it was lighter and so on and so forth. And my head may have broken the surface, I'm not sure. And then I just headed straight back down again. And here's the thing, on the way, as I'm sort of descending, in this murky water, all of the air finally went out. I couldn't hold my breath any longer. I had lost most of it earlier when I fell in. And I had always imagined that drowning would be a horrific way to die. And many people, feel that same way because we've all been in swimming pools or in lakes or in the ocean, and had an experience where you suck in a big gulp of water and how horrific that is and the instant terror that sets in, and that's what I had imagined. Well, guess what? When all the air goes out and it's replaced by water, when the water comes in, there's absolutely no struggle.
Really?
Absolutely. Your lungs don't crave for anything. And, and in fact, there's a great peacefulness that comes over. And, and I guess it makes sense because we spent the first 9 months of our life in a liquid environment.
You're reading my mind right now. You're literally reading my mind right now. Yes.
Yeah, totally. So, it was almost, pleasant, womb-like, if you will. And in fact, I was concerned that I wasn't concerned, which sounds ridiculous because, I just started to fade away. But I was so amazed that when I quit struggling, when all the air went out and the water came in and replaced it, it was just this great peacefulness. And I just slowly sank to the bottom, kind of bewildered or amazed. And I remember my feet sinking into the mud and then my knees. I was just, sort of, I'm not sure what the word is, completely absorbed in what was happening to me on a physical sense.
So you still had awareness?
Well, oh yeah. And slowly what happens, obviously with the lack of oxygen, eventually, one just goes to sleep. And so, or loses consciousness. And so I'm not sure how long it took or whatever, but, eventually I just faded into unconsciousness or into the blackness. And I don't know how long I was gone or unconscious, but at some point I sort of jolted awake or aware. And I was still, and everything had changed. I was still underneath the water and I knew that. But I seemed to be in a bubble of energy. And inside this bubble of energy was every color in the rainbow. And these colors just vibrated through me. And I was so amazed. And I totally recall, on my knees in the mud, running my hands through these colors. And I could feel the vibrations. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I didn't know you could feel colors. And each one, like red, felt different than blue, and blue felt different than green, and purple, and so on. And they, the colors, or the vibrations of color, sort of, went right through into my body, into my chest, and I could feel them vibrating inside me. And the whole thing was so incredible. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I didn't know you could feel colors. And then I began to think, hey, wait a minute. This is weird, I thought, well, am I dead or am I dying? Because this is weird, you know. And it's funny because the only reference I had to death, I didn't even know anybody who died when I was 12 years old. So the only reference I had to death was a few weeks before that. I had read the book Tom Sawyer. And in the book Tom Sawyer, Tom is believed to have drowned in the Mississippi, and he returns home, looking in the back of the church, and to his own memorial service. And I thought about that. And almost instantly I went shooting out of the water. Not in my physical body, obviously, but in spiritual form, astral body or whatever you want to call it, energy body. And in an instant, I'm floating over the choir loft in the back of our Catholic church out in the country, looking down over this huge empty church, thinking, well, hey, if this is my funeral, where is everybody?
Sorry.
my mom and dad would be here. My brothers and sisters would probably be there. And of course, it's 4:30 on a Saturday afternoon, right? So I had no idea, but what just absolutely astounded me was that I was floating. I was flying. And I was floating about 3 or 4 feet above the pews on the choir loft on the second floor of the church, looking down over this big church. And I was flying. And I remember thinking that, wow, if this is dead, this is so cool. And then I thought, hey, Tom Sawyer didn't fly, and I'm flying. And it was such an incredible feeling, and I could control where I floated to, just with my thoughts. I could move backwards, forwards, so on and so forth. And it was just so incredible. And as I'm floating there, thinking how amazing this was, all of a sudden it was like somebody kicked me in the stomach. And in an instant, I'm back on the shore of this pond, and my cousin has me upside down, and my face is bouncing in the mud, and he's pumping the water out of me. And it was so like, wow, and, I probably vomited for a minute or two to get all the water out. But afterwards, my lungs burnt a little bit, but all of us, my 2 cousins and my little brother and I, we sat around this pond, and our eyes were like saucers. It's like, holy smoke, that was close, right? Well, I had I looked at it kind of in a different way, and we made this pact right there and then, because we knew that if we ever told anybody about this, we'd get, in big trouble. So we made a pact that we're never going to tell anybody else. And then we walked really slowly on the way home. It was about 1.5 miles, so our clothes would dry off. And we got back to the farm, and I was outside, and I'll bet you it wasn't 10 minutes. And all of a sudden I heard the kayang and cussing in German coming out of my house. Somebody spilled the beans, and there was 2 kids got a good whipping on that day, and I was one of them. That'll teach me to die, I guess.
Sorry. I love the sense of humor. Yeah.
Well, it was such an absurd thing, and I had shared this with my cousin who saved my life, my cousin Brian, who was my best friend also. And on the way back where we're walking, I told him what happened to me, and he looked at me like I was insane, and he said, Brian Sawyer, Jesus, we thought you were dead, and it was sort of funny because afterwards, having, 8 sisters and 2 brothers, over time, I shared some of the things with the youngest of my sisters, who were sort of my babysitters anyway. And I told them about this, what happened. But it was sort of, they were like, I discovered that not all people could share that. And, they'd be like, whoa, Mom, come on over here, check out this boy. He got water in the brain,
Right. Yeah.
So I learned that it wasn't something that I could really share that well with people. And really I had no idea how that affected me until many, many years later, how it sort of substantially changed my own thought processes. And until, things changed, but I didn't attach it to anything. I didn't attach any spiritual significance to it or anything else.
You didn't know any different, right? You didn't know any different.
Well, I'm 12 years old. Right. And so, but what happened is I seemed to, I had this ability to see things. I could find things in my mind, and so, and the rest of the family began to understand this. And, when you got 8 sisters, sometimes there's things that get lost and things like that. But they came to the point where they would go, hey, ask Paul, because I seem to have this ability, which caused them to think sometimes that I was the one who took it.
Right. Yeah.
And sometimes I did, because that's how you build your own legend, Oh, yeah.
Capitalize on that.
Yes, I know where it is. Yeah. So, but I didn't, it was, actually many, many years later, probably when I was in my 40s, before I really understood the significance of how that had changed my whole perception of life.
Wow. Now, at any point during your first experience, because you had 3, you go all the way in. Some people go for 1, you go for all 3, and then you continue doing it in your other experiences. But when you had that experience for the first time, were you aware of any other beings around you? Were you aware of any other anybody close to you, or did you just feel peace?
When I was 12 in the drowning, I wasn't aware of anybody else around. All right.
Okay.
A number of years later, when I was 17, I was involved in a car crash. We were out in the country in the middle of Saskatchewan, in late November, and it was literally about 20 below outside. And, I was sitting in the middle of a 1964 Ford going down the highway with my friend driving at about 85 miles an hour. And, whether we had to blow it or whatever, I don't know, but we ended up, flipping time after time in the ditch. Just demolished the car. I went unconscious. I got flipped out of the car through the windshield. Didn't wear seatbelts in those days, in those years. Right. And became aware at some point, I'm not sure how long later, perhaps an hour, of being absolutely cold and freezing. And I became aware that somebody was there, keeping me warm. And it was like a luminous being. And then I could not explain this or understand this. In fact, when I did wake up or become more aware, I was just really, really cold, and I could not recall being in an accident.
Were you out of your body already by that time, or?
No, I was still in the physical body. I mean, I may have, okay. But it didn't register in my mind. And in fact, all I knew is I woke up and I'm sitting in a field, with snow on it, and I'm freezing. I had no shoes on. The shoes, when you go at the windshield of your car, yes. the front seat, your feet go underneath it and they pulled your shoes off. So right. I'm absolutely freezing, and I wanted to get in the car. I'm sitting there looking at this car, and I did not even comprehend that it was smashed to smithereens. It was on its wheels, and the roof was right down on the seats almost. But I actually sat in the car and tried to start it up because I'm cold. And it was just such a strange thing. And of course it didn't start. And then I became aware, and, the sort of mayhem around me and all the twisted metal. I went, and then it came back to me. I remembered that we were in an accident. And then I thought, oh my God, where's Gerald? Where's my cousin Mervyn? And I just absolutely panicked, and I ran out into the field, and, basically I tripped over Mervyn, and, both of them were unconscious, and I thought that they were dead. And I didn't realize that, most of my right ear had been, torn off on the hood ornament or wherever on the way out of the vehicle. And so I'm listening for their breath, on their chests and so on and so forth. And I just panicked. I thought that they're dead, and, there's, a screaming was inside me, I think. And I just faded. I was so, I didn't realize I had, a cracked skull or, as well, and, certainly, concussion. And I just drifted off to sleep again in this ditch, and it wasn't like a voluntary sleep. I just sort of went unconscious. Right. And at some point, then I became aware of being really, really cold, but somebody was keeping me warm, and I could feel the warmth, or what I thought was warmth. And there was this luminous being of some kind, and the presence felt male, but he was waking me up. And in fact, I heard the words, like, Paul, wake up. And I woke up or became aware just as probably the only, because we're out in the middle of nowhere.
Nowhere, right.
And it's like 11 o'clock at night, and maybe the last car that's going to go past on this gravel road was, there was some headlights off about a half a mile in the distance. And some voice, yelled at me to wake up. And I saw this car coming, and basically it was probably almost 100 yards to the road. And I crawled on my hands and knees. I didn't realize that I had, a punctured lung and smashed ribs and a ruptured kidney. And I crawled out to the highway and got just to the edge of the road as this car went, it was going to be screeching by on the highway in the gravel road. And they saw me at the last minute and and hit the brakes and came back or backed up. And of course, I had no idea how mangled my face was and that it was covered in blood. And, they just said, oh my God, stay right there. We'll go and we'll call an ambulance. And so they headed off. And, I think I sank back into oblivion again and became aware again that somebody was keeping me warm, when I'm not sure how much later, would have been probably half hour later, when I saw, heard, or saw the police car lights and red lights flashing coming down this road out in the country in the middle of nowhere. And so the police cars arrived and the ambulances, and they scooped us up and took us off to the little hospital in Bigger, Saskatchewan.
And your cousins were okay?
Yes, yeah. Everybody lived. My friend had a broken pelvis, and my cousin had a cracked skull and other things. And I had a couple of broken ribs and a contused or ruptured kidney. And, so yeah. And
so you were quite mangled. Your mom must have been very proud of you again.
Oh yes. Yeah, it was, yeah.
Did you get a whooping that time too?
No, not so much. I was already 17.
Yeah.
And so I lost a kidney and a hockey career, so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. So the entire time you're going in and out of consciousness and you're crawling on your knees, you're not feeling any pain, are you?
Well, absolutely not until the police car arrived.
Yeah.
And then I kind of freaked out because for some reason I thought my little brother was there. And I couldn't find him, and this policeman literally had to sort of, fight me down to, and then I realized how injured I was. He's sitting in the back seat of a police car waiting for the ambulance with me, sitting beside me, and he was looking at the side of my head, and I had a cracked skull too, and my ear was torn off almost. And so I noticed him outside a few minutes later when the ambulance approached, and he was throwing up. So it wasn't probably a good sight or something like that. But
wow. And then you had.
But it was only then that I realized, the pain that I was in. And actually, when I woke up in the hospital, I was aware as we went into the hospital, I was conscious. And I'm not sure, my understanding or my memory is that I slept for about 2 or 3 days and became aware in the hospital and freaked out when the nurse showed me, opened, that little table that they put over top of the bed and opened it up with a mirror in it. It was pretty gruesome. I had, back in those days, of course, this is 1967 or whatever it was. And, I had long hair, like a beetle haircut. And
right.
I looked like a monk because they had shaved the top of my head to put in these big blue stitches right down the center of my skull. And,
wow.
and it was kind of horrifying, and my face was all swollen and everything else. So.
But you recovered. Everything is fine. I mean, you sound, fully intact. You had your career afterwards. So I'm assuming somebody was looking after you.
Yes, yeah. No, I lost the use of the kidney, but, other than that, no, it was pretty much, no problem.
And then you had another one in your 40s. That's the heart attack?
Yes.
was that, is it okay if I ask? What happened then?
Oh, wow. Well, I think that was the one that did it. I mean, I was a politician already. And
they're saying to me, that's the one that totally took you over the edge.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I was playing old timers hockey, at the age of 41. And we're like weekend warriors, Yeah. I mean, during the week, or in the weekends, we're out battling in tournaments and things like that. And then on Monday, we're back behind a desk for the rest of the week, and working and stuff like that. And it was kind of funny because this was like in early November and the hockey season had just started. And, we had a couple of friends of ours. One of them was about my age, about 40 years old, who died. He had a heart attack in the middle of a floor hockey game at school. He was a school teacher. And he
wow.
Yeah. And then we had another friend, who had a heart attack and, he didn't die. But anyway, my wife was saying like, oh my God, you're not 20 anymore. You're 40. You want to kill yourself? You got to get in better shape before you go out early in the season, right? And I had said to her, oh, geez, woman, I've never been in better shape, Well, I would remember those words. So literally about 2 weeks later, we're out on a Sunday morning, old timers hockey, and we're a little short-handed. And so I ended up playing a longer shifts than, and suddenly it was like somebody hit me in the chest with a sledgehammer. It was just like boom, and I couldn't breathe. And so what the heck is wrong? And so I went and I sat on the bench and I could hardly get my breath. And then my elbow started to hurt, like right on the peak of my left elbow. And I'm thinking, what? I didn't hit anybody. Nobody hit me. What is going on here? And I began to sweat profusely and I was getting nauseous, like I was going to throw up. And I thought, well, I've got the flu or something. And so I headed into the dressing room because I felt like I needed to throw up. And as the time passed, as I'm in the dressing room, I thought, I can't play anymore. I have to go home because I'm really, really sick. The pain in my elbow was just incredible. It just took my breath away. My chest hurt a little bit, but not bad, but I was just sweating and so nauseous. And so, I, contemplated, well, I should shower. And then I thought, I don't feel good. So I, sort of took off my clothing and gathered up, my hockey stuff and, put on my clothing and gathered up my bag and headed out, to, head up this long sort of stairway out of the ice surface in the arena in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, where I was a politician there and a mayor for many years. And as I'm looking up this long stairway and I'm thinking, maybe I should be going to the hospital. This isn't good. I don't know if I can make it up the stairs. At any rate, the rink attendant happened to come by and he saw me and it just, and he kind of freaked out and went off to call the ambulance. And, I just kind of, folded along the wall. I couldn't hold myself up and I just sort of drifted off until I'm like, sitting on my bum and, on the concrete and kind of, went to sleep or drifted away. And I became aware when I heard, the noise and clatter of the wheels of the stretcher as the paramedics are rushing down the hallway in the hockey rink. And they scooped me up and put me in the ambulance. And we had gone maybe a block or two. And this young lady, the paramedic, is asking, name and address so they know where to send the bill, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And, and while I'm answering her, at some point it sounded so strange, like I was talking in a barrel and my voice sounded really strange. And I began to think it's like I'm listening to myself from somewhere else.
Right.
And then I slowly just drifted into sleep. I just went unconscious. And I'm not sure how long I was gone, but again, I jolted back into awareness, and it sort of, there was like a pinging sound in the center of my head. And it just like a triangle, in high school band, like bing, and jolted me awake. And I was amazed because all the pain was gone. And I felt wonderful. And as I'm laying there in the ambulance, And I felt like I was really light, and I began to move, and it was really astonishing. I felt like I was a leaf in the wind, starting to lift up, and I floated right up to the ceiling. And
You're out of your body, yeah.
Oh yeah, and I got up to the ceiling, and I'm looking down, and I can see myself in the ambulance, and I can see this young lady, adjusting the oxygen mask and checking, my heart rate and stuff like this on looking at a wristwatch. And I floated, when I'm floating there, and I thought about my wife, and I thought, oh, Candace is going to be so ticked.
Pissed.
I remembered my famous last words. Hey woman, I've never been in better shape, right? And it just, the reality hit me sort of like a lightning bolt. And I thought about my wife and my kids, and almost instantly I was floating in my house, watching them get ready for church. And I remembered it was Sunday morning, and I thought, hey, maybe I should have gone to church instead, And I found myself saying goodbye to them. It was like, and I knew everything would be fine. It would be tough for a while, but they'd be all right. And then I thought about myself. I don't know if I was jolted back in my body or whatever in the ambulance. The next thing I know, I'm floating in the ambulance again at the ceiling, looking down and watching this paramedic working on me. And I looked at myself, and for some strange reason, it was like I'm saying goodbye to myself, to my own physical body. And the next thing I knew, it was like an energy of some sort. I began to feel like drawn away, and I floated, and this is so cool because I floated through the roof of the ambulance, and I could feel everything. It was sort of a slow, movement. I could feel the insulation and the material inside, and then the insulation, and then finally the metal as I passed through it, and I floated up above the ambulance, maybe 10 or 20 feet or whatever, and I'm flying along with it, watching it below me as it's, screeching off to the hospital with all the, siren going and the lights on. And then I had the perception that everything started to turn gray or dark. And I was compelled, it felt like something was drawing me. And I started to move very quickly, or that was the perception that I had, that I'm being drawn very, very quickly in this darkness. And I began to see a peak of light. And I'm not sure, some people talk about in near-death experiences about tunnels. It didn't seem tunnel-like to me, but it was like a peak of light far away. And as I'm shooting towards it, and it's getting closer and closer, and I was absolutely ecstatic. I was elated. And if you remember, the movie E.T., this is many, many years ago, when E.T., he's all sick and stuff like that, and
wants to go home.
Yeah, the spaceship comes back, and his heart lights up, and he's going like, home, home, home. And that's what I felt like. It was so exciting. I'm going home, and I wanted nothing more. And it was just, absolutely ecstatic. I'm going home, and all of a sudden it was like, boom! And I'm in the emergency room at the hospital.
Oh, wow.
And needles stuck into me and everything else, and the pain is back, and my arm is killing me, and wow, it just took my breath away. And I was
And you're thinking, what the hell, I want to go back.
Exactly. I was so ticked. How dare they do this to me,
Did they have to paddle you? Did they have to paddle you?
That was the explosion.
Yeah.
And so, or at least that's my recall of it. And, they had me pumped full of intravenous and stuff like that. And so I watched this. It was a really interesting thing. It took an hour and a half, for them to clear up the clot that was in my heart. Right? Wow. And so I'm watching this, almost at eye level beside me on the bed, watching the heart monitor, go beep, 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 and then it would fibrillate, like beep, 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 and then it would go flat, like beep, and I'm watching this, and, a couple of times I even got woozy and, waiting for it, but the pain that was back in my arm, and this is the incredible thing. I would have said, cut it off, I'll go without it. Because the pain in my left arm was just incredible. But I became fascinated with watching this, the heart monitor and the blood pressure monitor and everything else. And I actually found myself cheering for the flat line.
Wow. It's not funny, but it's funny. Wow.
Yeah, it's funny. Because it was, I was in agony and pain, and just, a few minutes before that, I was in, an absolute bliss. I'm going home. And so I'm cheering for the flat line. And anyway, it took about an hour and a half. It was just, forever. And they finally this is like 1992 or whatever, and they finally injected a drug called streptokinase or something like that, which is a major blockbuster in the heart, and a couple of minutes later, I vomited and everything was good. It burst, it got rid of the clot in my heart. And I thought, I feel just fine. I want to go home. Well, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. And so I was stuck because, what I didn't realize, obviously, after an hour and a half, that, they told me that it had killed about 25% of my heart muscle. And so what happens, as frantic as that sounds, it's probably not that bad, because you grow scar tissue on it, right. And the rest of the heart compensates for it, and because it is a muscle, so it did, has scar tissue and so on and so forth. So it was an interesting stay in the hospital. So I think I was there for 5 or 6 or 7 days or something like that.
They're saying 7. They're saying 7, so I'm going to just trust you.
Okay. And so I'm, one of those days I was talking to the nurse, and everybody knows me obviously because I'm, the politician in town. Right. And I was telling this nurse what happened in the ambulance, that it floated on my body and everything. She was really, really elated or amazed by it. And, and the heart specialist just happened to walk in the room after I was telling her this. And she went over and she says, "Doctor, did Paul tell you what happened in the ambulance? And you had this blah, 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 blah." And the doctor is like in a way too loud stage whisper. And he goes, "Oh, yes, no, it's a typical response, just like lack of oxygen to the brain. The body understands its entire straits, and so it creates wishful things." But and I heard this, and I just, this just came out of me. I just blurted it, and I said, "Bullshit." Pardon me. And this doctor looked at me like I lost my mind, like, are you, he's sort of like, "Hey, I saved your life. What are you talking about?" And just at that moment, or a few moments later, his beeper went off in his pocket. All right. Now this is before cell phones and stuff like this, 1992 or whatever. And he pulls out this little black thingy out of his pocket. There's a little beeper thing. And this came out of my mouth. It hadn't happened ever before and never since. And it just came straight out of my mouth. And I said, I can't remember the names exactly, but I said, "It's Lorraine. You have to go pick up Jill at school because her car's in the garage." And I was like, "Whoa, what did I just say?" And he looked at me like, big eyed, like, "What?" And he left, right? About a half hour later, he comes back in and he looked at me and he says, "How could you possibly know that?" And I said, "Lack of oxygen to my brain." Because to me, it was such an insult. It was such, and it actually happened. And so there's this is a long time ago, but there's probably a heart specialist, whether he's still operating or not, or, in business, that it probably changed his view on a few things. But
it's incredible, isn't it? Because, doctors are scientifically based, and what you're talking about defies the logical thinking, defies the parameters we live in. So that's why I kind of chuckled when I said, you're a politician. That's got to be a fun experience for you to be more left brain and have these experiences. It's like, how do you merge the two? What do you do with it?
Well, I think, and this is what, notwithstanding, the big experience with the heart attack and so on and so forth. I think everything changed for me when I was 12. I looked at life and death in a different way. I looked at life as that this is what we came for. Get out and enjoy it. Follow your passion. Fall in love. Get your heart broken. Then, my God, you're alive. Right? And it was sort of like, this is to me, it all in some ways made sense. There were, sort of to add a perspective to that. about a year and a half or 2 years after the drowning, when I was 12 years old, I was visiting my cousin in this small village where we lived. And on my walk back home on a Saturday afternoon, past the old Catholic churchyard, and we had in the churchyard, because we were forced to be, my little brother and I were altar boys, and we would see on a Sunday, we would hear this gobbling. There was wild turkeys, a couple of wild turkeys that were on the property, and people would see them, and we saw them too occasionally, sort of fluttering back and forth, right? And as I'm passing this churchyard, there's a whole row of like 80-foot high trees, 7, 8 stories high, beside the road, beside the church. And there's a huge nest in the top of one of these trees. And it must have been in the fall or whatever, because there weren't many, or early spring, there weren't many trees left, or leaves left on the tree. And I'm looking at this huge nest up in the top of this tree and thinking, that's probably the turkey nest. I didn't know that turkeys can't fly. Right? It was probably, which reminds me of WKRP in Cincinnati episode. But it's, so I'm, it probably was like an eagle's nest or something. It was a big, huge nest. So I crawled up this tree and all the way up to the top because I want to see it, and if there's little baby turkeys in there, I want to see them, or eggs or whatever. And I got right up to the top and I couldn't quite, I'm standing on this branch and it's close to the top of the tree and the branches aren't very thick anymore.
Oh, no.
And I'm holding myself up. I'm pulling on the branch where the nest is, and just up to my nose, and I got to stand on my tiptoes and pull myself up, look in, and for a minute there I thought, oh, I hope there's not a turkey in there. It's going to peck me in the face, or something. And, but I had to do it. So I pulled myself up and I'm pulling up to look in the nest, and all of a sudden the branch below me that I was standing on broke.
Oh, man.
Instantly, I just went flying down and I hit a branch maybe 10 feet below that. And it knocked me unconscious or something. It spun me around. And the next thing I know, I fell all the way to the ground, hitting branches as they came down, which is probably what saved my life. And, but what was amazing to me after I hit that first branch, all of a sudden I am floating in the tree, watching myself fall out of the tree, hitting branches until I landed flat on my bum or on my back on the ground. And it knocked the wind out of me or whatever. I was already, and it was just, and I'm floating in the tree looking down on myself and I thought, get up. And all of a sudden when it caught up to me, like, and I took this big breath because it had knocked the air out of me, on the way down, and it was so bizarre because I'm laying on the ground looking up into the tree and going, how did that happen? I was in the tree watching myself fall. And it was just such a, it was something that you can't, you can't put your finger on. But it was, whoa, that was weird. How could that be? So, I learned again that we're not these physical bodies. There's a part of us that doesn't die or just stays in the tree. And it was, for me, there was just such a sort of a remarkable revelation or answer to so many questions. And so with that, that set me up for a whole lifetime of living, if you will, and going for it. So I think one of the most valuable lessons I've had are those near-death experiences.
Would you say that having those experiences made you somewhat comfortable, if I can use that terminology, with leaving the concept of you leaving the body? Because essentially what you do is you teach this out-of-body experience. I'm assuming is very similar, if essentially not the same, as near-death experiences, except it doesn't happen, it happens at will. It doesn't happen through unfortunate circumstances.
Well, yes. I think it certainly opened that doorway. Although it's a difficult track because after the heart attack from the hockey game, I began to have spontaneous out-of-body experiences.
Yeah.
And I would find myself floating at the ceiling and so amazed and so mesmerized by it. And I first heard about these things in around 1981, I saw a television interview with a man named Robert Monroe.
Yes.
And he'd written this book called Journeys Out of the Body. And I was fascinated by it, so I picked up the book from the library, and I read it from cover to cover, and I took it back and thought, that's interesting, but this guy's a nut job. And I took it back to the library, and 11 years later, I wake up to find myself floating at the ceiling of my bedroom. And one of the first things I thought of was, holy smoke, Monroe wasn't crazy. And I had this wild experience. And it sort of opened the doorway, and I think, notwithstanding that, I think the several near-death experiences sort of opened that doorway. And when I began to have them, it was very scary at first. Even though I could argue and rationalize and say, I want this more than anything because this would be so cool, there's a part of me or part of us that hangs on to that left brain reality.
For dear life, yes, of course. Preserving life, yeah.
So it's a big fear, because it's a big unknown, right? And so these things began to happen spontaneously, and I found out about this. I went back to the library and I borrowed, every book that I could find on spirituality and on near-death experiences. And I discovered Robert Monroe had written another book called Far Journeys, and that he had, or more importantly, that he had created a center, for research into out-of-body experiences in Virginia, near Charlottesville. And in fact, it is a world leader in consciousness research, and they developed a special process or special patented binaural beat patterns that they called hemisync, which were proven in the laboratory to alter brain waves to allow people to move into that state of consciousness where you are between awake and asleep, or into dream states where you're in theta dream states where you're in 8 to 10 cycles per second in your brain waves and so on and so forth. And they can actually allow that condition to happen. And so I went there and totally fascinated, and I fell in love with the place. Excuse me for a second, please.
Oh, no worries, no worries.
That's the danger of having a telephone in the room.
No worries at all. Something my guide is telling me, and I don't know if this is a fact, this is something that you would probably be able to answer way more than I can, but what he's saying to me is that when you had your near-death experiences, because of the circumstances that surrounded it, meaning it was, accidents, every time you left your body, it's almost like the shell, which is the body, that I'm going to use the term contains the soul, which is a terrible term, but that's how I'm going to use it. Every time you leave, it's almost like you loosen the shell, so it's easier to leave the next time. Would you say that that's the case?
I think so, because every experience that you have, or most of the experiences that you have, lessen that fear a little bit. And for the most part, I think it's fear that holds us there. But certainly everybody is in a different place in life.
Right, exactly.
So the people that, in sort of this transformation of my life, if you will, I was the mayor of Swift Current, Saskatchewan. And the funny part was that, this was, and it's a wonderful community. 80%, it's fundamental Christian community. So 80% were Mennonite. All right.
Wow.
And,
yeah.
So, pretty fundamental. And so it was like I was living a double life, when I visited the Monroe Institute for the first time, they have programs, 6-day programs that people from all over the world can come to, and you get to experience hemisync, or being able to be in that space between awake and asleep that allows us to have experiences of some sort. All right. Some would hope to have an out-of-body experience. The reality is that we don't have to go anywhere. We're already connected to everything. Sometimes it's just a matter of transferring our thoughts, and we're there. And so I became so fascinated with this place that I went, back several times. And I got to spend some time in what they call the lab, and being monitored and so on and so forth. And some of the things that I experienced while there, and some of the things I told them about, got somebody's attention, and eventually, I was introduced to a fellow named Dale Graff, and he was the Pentagon director of this top secret program called Stargate, and so I learned about this, and I thought, and they thought that I might have some abilities in it, and I thought, well, I might have been born in Saskatchewan, but it wasn't yesterday, I wasn't going to, believe it. So long story short, I spent about, a couple of months training and learning about this process, and it didn't come easy for me because I'm hanging on to real life. I'm hanging on to my left brain, and the sort of the enemy of remote viewing is your left brain. Mm-hmm. Every single person on this planet, this is our innate ability. That we all can do this. Some obviously, are more adept at it. Some can do it. Right. It's like musical ability. Everybody can learn to play the piano, but you get.
That's what I say. Exactly.
Yeah. So, essentially, I was recruited or hired, and I've never worked for Stargate because I'm a Canadian, but I've helped out with, various looking for missing people, looking for hostages, and sometimes for bad people, and so on. And so I was hired initially. I was hired as a remote viewing instructor at the Monroe Institute in Virginia, and been doing that basically for about 15 years now.
Wow! So this is essentially what you were supposed to do for the rest of your life, which all the experiences were prepared you for. My producer is just letting me know we have literally 1 minute left. I don't know where the time has gone. This is absolutely fascinating. I am going to meet you on Saturday because I'm going to Monroe Institute in Canada. For those of you listeners who are interested in estates on Canada, that information I will post on the YouTube channel when I post this show. But I am so excited. I've left my body once. I think I saw blue outline all over my body, but that was it. And I'm just excited to see what's going to happen. I might even just record a video or two while I'm there for the listeners to see what the experience is. So I do want to mention your book. It is Eyes of an Angel. And is it available on Amazon.com or only Amazon.ca?
Oh, it's available all over the world. Perfect. On Amazon.com, Amazon.ca. Bookstores, it's pretty much everywhere.
And this is your personal experience. I would highly, 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 highly recommend because you have a fascinating story. And thank you so, so much for joining me. I can't wait to meet you. This has been a fascinating hour. I don't know where it's gone, but thank you so much for allowing me to do this interview with you.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing you Saturday.
See you Saturday.
Thank you so much.